Hi, I'm Kelly.
And hi, I'm Marianne, and you're listening to The Girlfriend Guide.
Today, we welcome CG Dahlin to the show. Today, we welcome CG Dahlin to the show. CG is the former director of religious education at the Cascade Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. He's a frequent presenter at the non-denominational Pagan Sanctuary, Our Lady of the Earth and Sky. He's a palmist and a tarot reader in Central Washington, and an academic with specializations in etymology, history, theology, philosophy, and language. You can also find him on YouTube, where he has an extensive catalog of informative talks and a complete spiritual studies course. I discovered CG during research on goddess history, and we wanted to bring him here as the first video that I discovered of his was entitled Goddess Worship and the Fall of the Goddess, Divine Feminine, Mother Nature, and the Primordial Goddess. And Marianne and I have both re-listened to that episode in the past few days, and we have a lot of questions. Is there anything you'd like to say in response to any of that, or should we just jump right in?
No, I'm excited to jump right in.
Okay. I'll go first, and then Marianne and I can just alternate because we each took our own notes. Somewhere in that talk, you mentioned something about when you were talking about the goddess figurines. You said something about goddess figurines or goddess images hanging in trees, but then you didn't say any more about that. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So the accounts of these goddess figurines that were discovered have many different orientations that they were found in. If I recall correctly on that specific source, this tradition of hanging from the trees, I think, was the Samoyedic extending into the Siberian area that became ultimately the Sami and the Finnish people, of which had a recursive religious motif of presenting divinity above. And of course, to me, it seems no accident that the goddess and the tree are one and the same to a certain effect. Some ancient ideas of what the tree represents is how Mother Nature or the underworld or Mother Earth communicates with or provides gifts for humankind living on the surface. So if I recall correctly, those are the specific cultures to find that with. You find it later with when they would ceremoniously hunt the bear, and they would put the bear's head in the tree facing east towards the rising sun to return its soul to where it goes. And in this respect, it doesn't take a stretch of the imagination to put the goddess above in the figurine, Our Lady of the Earth and Sky. I hope that's thorough enough.
That is a thorough, completely satisfactory answer.
Okay.
Mayor, you want to go next?
First, thank you so much for being here, and I really enjoyed listening to your lecture. And sorry, giant black cat. And a couple of things popped up. And what can you tell us a little bit more in depth about the dethroning of Gaia?
Ooh, so just Gaia in particular. Just Gaia.
She's one of my patrons, so it really struck me.
It's really hard to trace what would have been. When does something begin as an idea or as a motif, right? So are we tracing Gaia all the way back to, say, Namu of the ancient Sumers? Is it borrowed? But in the specific mythos for the Greeks, there was, and I mentioned this maybe in that talk, I know I've mentioned it a few in a few different talks that the Greeks knew when I was living amongst them and talking in these higher circles that the goddess was original to the pantheon before the pantheon got codified. So Homer really did the thing when it came to concreting the idea of the more masculine oriented leadership role that we know as the pantheon that we inherit now. Zeus is the big boy. However, before, in the more disparate civilizations that was the Greek Isles, before what we refer to them as now the Greeks, they would have been a Gaia affiliate, Hecate, Artemis, Aphrodite especially. And so also with that question comes the question of which archetype, because they all became distinguished later, but it's hard to know if they were in on the same bag and to what degree and at what point they got married off or dethroned, because oftentimes that was the trope of kind of circumventing the independent power of the goddess was to marry them off, because part of Greek society was, I'm sure you guys are familiar with this. So to answer your question, it's tricky. Gaia's particular disposition of being a huge part of the early creation story and then relatively turn into a villainous figure has always reminded me of Namu turning into Tiamat via the Babylonians. So I question how much of this is a straight ripoff of former stories that were told, but I also wonder of how allegorical this is to the evolution of humankind and their own ways of contextualizing their mythic past. Gaia was, right? Gaia was, but now we are in an era where she has been turned into more of a villain figure, i.e. whatever manifestations that the earth can create that are violent and that ruin the civilization, the tenuousness of mankind's little cute thing on this world, villain figure. So I hope that's helpful too. I know these questions are tricky and I always feel somewhat unsatisfactory because there's so much of this sprawl that happens that makes it very difficult to give me the answer. I want certainty here. But it's an older trope. It's an older trope that goes beyond Gaia. And I think the revitalization of Gaia as a patron and as a or is it patroness? I think it would be patroness, is very encouraging because I think it's very in tandem with this renaissance of paying more attention to the Earth Mother, the Earth spirits, and being more respectful towards ecology. And I think it's perfectly on time.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I was looking for additional information about the origins of
Gaia?
Gaia.
I'd be very curious to hear.
Well, I'm reading from, do you have this book, CG?
I have not gotten that one.
I recommend it. So,
Go
ahead.
I do have another thread. GE, flat out. The Orphic religion might have been a predecessor to what we know as the Greek religion. Ge was earth and was a part of the early primordial goddess. So that could be something that extends beyond as well. Another lead that could help follow, but sorry, I didn't want to forget that.
Oh, that's okay.
Go on.
Well, Marianne hasn't read this book yet either, but I'm reading it. And so Carla, who I sent you to for her goddess podcast project, she's also doing a book club. And this is the book, this is The Great Cosmic Mother, Rediscovering the Religion of the Earth. This is the first book that we're doing in the book club. And it's really fascinating. And it's got a lot of really good information. I told Carla the same thing I told you, that I think you guys are like cosmic twins. Because you talk about a lot of the same material and you're both academics. So You like to cite source information and actually share your citations with us. Marianne and I were having this conversation earlier today about, if I told her, I said, when somebody tells you something, the first question you should ask them is, what's your source information? Because if you can't cite a source for me, then you're just stating your opinions and ideas as facts.
Mm.
So
There's an awful lot of that.
Needless to say, I
Yes.
didn't like it very much.
But we can all be a little naive, right? Especially with technology being what it is. I mean, there's so much information overload out there. Unless you are an academic, how do you know if where your information is coming from is true?
Mm. And that impossible search towards perfection in that regard, because then there
Right.
comes a credibility of the sources. There comes personal experience. Where do personal experiences play into the mix?
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about there.
And it's really hard to not bring your own perspective into what you're talking about or what you're researching. When I got my master's degree in library science, we had a community archives class, and we talked a lot about even archivists who are supposed to be, neutral. They're not, because we're human. So, what defines what's eligible for the archive and what's not? Well, a person has to make that decision. So, I went off on a little bit of a rant there, but that's kind of just how it is. You talked about the moon and moon worship and moon ritual and moon reverence as the OG spirituality. So I was hoping that you could talk a little bit more about that, and kind of I looked up the etymology of the word religio, which I'm probably mispronouncing. And since you're an etymologist,
To bind, right?
Yeah. So say whatever you'd like to about those topics.
So this is a lot of fun. I very much enjoy being here. I with that lead about the OG religion, it's something that I've thrown out quite a few times, because it is arbitrary to say, all right, here, we got it, but it is to say that when we follow the traditions of animistic cultures, you will see that there are these cultural taboos that happen everywhere across the world to some degree. You can see it in the Americas, you can see it in Africa, you can see it in Siberia. How much further do you need to look, right? And these tropes, for instance, women not being allowed near the hunting tools as a kind of, not as a misogynistic display, but as a display of the concept that women inhabited long ago, in retrospect to it being now. And what this has to do with the moon is the tie to womanhood and the menstrual cycle, causing a difference in scent, the belief, or essence or spirit attaching itself to the tools, would have given animals a hint as to what the men's hunting, and would have, it's that old thing where it's like that kind of weird cliche that people say that's like the bears know when you're menstruating, kind of weird thing like that. Something very long inherited, which is traceable in all these different ways across the world, right? So in the origin of where this is coming from must have been a preceding religion that has since fanned itself across animistic religions across the world. And I say religions very, very tenuously there, spiritualities, traditions. And in which case, you can't trace anything other than the tie between womanhood and the moon as well. So in that talk, there was an extensive session on how women are the keepers of the hearth and women are the keepers of time. The menstrual cycle being the only clock innate within the body. And that use of time as a source of reverence, and also tied to fertility, which fertility is always the first of any reverence in the ancient world. Because how the hell do you create, right? That by itself is miraculous and inexplicable, and still is, mind you, it still is, but much more so to those with the mind to pay attention to it, right? And so the moon as a direct kind of analogy, a visual analogy for what this process of creation within the woman, observably within the woman, is there. So if we ever kind of like we're eking out of, say, this primitive mindset, these are the things that are immediately observable to us in our perspective on the world, if that makes sense. We have to enter that mind, shed all of our objectivities and blah, blah, blah. And,
Right.
that's where I'm coming from with that specific statement. And I don't find it any accident that when we look at anywhere across the world, when there's a moon goddess, it is feminine. And in the case of my moon deification talk session, I was following male moon gods, and in which case I was finding over and over again that they had been changed into male.
Right. Like
So
this, like the guy in the sky was the complete invention of men.
that's a fun one to talk about. Tracing that one's a fun one to talk about. But yes, there's a lot of fascinating leads beyond just the hearth, because that's a central fire, right? Central fire that guides the people, that is the lifeblood of the people. Also analogous to, or an allegory for the moon. The moon is a fire in the sky that warms us during the night, and that gives us light to see during the night, and gives us blessings. The blessings of being able to see at night and to hunt at night and to have the perfect grounds. It's a blessing from the mother. There's so much to unravel there.
So I just want to dovetail about something that you just said moments ago. And we kind of tend to use the words religion, spirituality, tradition interchangeably. So when I was looking at that etymology of religio, that's what I was wondering, like, when did religion as a concept like really take hold? Was that just in the Greco-Roman world, or did that happen prior to that and we just didn't have a name for it yet? Or I was trying to find the first time that word was ever introduced into someone's writing or whatever, and I couldn't find an answer to that. So
there's a trouble there, because our definition for that word has changed through time as well.
yes.
You might see precursors to it, like say it was when Constantine made Christianity I believe it was Constantine. I hope I'm not flipping things around right now. Also, memory is a terrible thing for credibility.
Right.
But you make the religion a state religion, right? And you're like, that's it. That's the point right there. That's when people are enforcing a sense of belief, right? Because that would seem to be a good point for the start of religion. However, if you take it back further, you have these rulers like Hammurabi that are pushing a mythos to propagate their rule. And so it's so tied in with political power that it's hard to say at what point is this not a religious ideology and a political ideology in tandem. And even in our recent history, everything was a theocracy. The law was the law, right? And the separation between church and state was a crazy idea to think that these are two different ruling bodies, because historically it was unfounded. So it's terribly tricky again, because then it's like, I did do a session where I wanted to track the birth of religion in the sense of it's no longer about nature. It's about these figurative things that exist. It's not something that we can look at, right? If it's Jupiter, then we can see Jupiter. If it's the moon, we can see the moon. If it's a wind, we can feel the wind. These are observable things. But as soon as it became incorporeal, untouchable, abstract, that is what I was saying was the kind of point where religion begins, because it's divorced from beingness. Now it's imaginary, or like far out, or hypothetical, or yeah. And
So
there's many ways to approach that question. Is my only point, I would say.
I like this definition that I found, and I think it was in Oxford, and it said religion is usually defined as a socio-cultural system of designated behaviors, practices, morals, beliefs, worldviews, texts, sanctified places, prophecies, ethics, or organizations that generally relates humanity to supernatural, transcendental, and spiritual elements. Here's the kicker. The very last thing it says is, however, there is no scholarly consensus over what precisely constitutes a religion.
Yes. And you notice already there's contention because how lengthy that answer is. And to get into that debate is confounding. It's a lot of fun, to be fair. There's a lot of fun to be had there. You know, in what ways, what I would say is a sense of community is quintessential to how we interpret what religion is.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just that I believe something, it's that everybody's in on it with me, which validates me. And then we can all charge forth in the great glory of the truth that we only know, right?
Right.
And so it's that tribalism kind of mentality that I associate with the word religion as opposed to spirituality, because in my mind, spirituality is an individual seeking, as opposed to here is a doctrine that became enforced by groupthink and by crowd pleasing and by rulership and power play, which bleeds away from the individual, right? That's suppressing the individual by the collective.
Right.
Another take.
Right. So, Mayor, I think I actually said all the things I wanted to say and asked all the questions I wanted to ask. So, over to you.
Wow. This one is going to be, I've got a couple that kind of all fall under the same umbrella and time period. I'd love to hear some more about ancient Sumeria and Inanna and Ishtar. Oh, okay.
So, I mean, it's really hard to say when we talk about history at all. It's always a matter of how much we've unraveled, right? How much we've dug up, how much there is to find. And so how to trace that link between what was animistic culture to what became Sumer and the ideas therein that's a really big missing space that in the unknown we tend to want to fill in gaps. So to a certain degree, I've had to try to do that for my own sanity of going down that quest. But Namu as the great mother in the initial dynasties of Sumer, I think is very telling. And we don't have access to the creation stories that were being said back then. We only have access to the creation story of the Enuma Elish, which is the Babylonian tale, which is much later. So everything when it comes to what we have to say about Ishtar or Inanna or Namu, we are getting it after the fact, right? We have to parse it after the fact. Now, just using the tropes of animism, Namu is the primordial mother, which is the metaphysical nature, the foundation of all things. And this is where it's tricky because I don't know at what point it gets abstract here. Ishtar is what would become, Ishtar and Inanna is what would become ooh, gosh, am I forgetting the Egyptian name right now? Aphrodite for the Greeks. And this would be more indicative of the mother's presence that is here and observable, the love, the beauty, the compassion. Whereas usually you would separate the metaphysical mother because that is that's really verbose, right? Like that's its own kind of feel versus a presence of the feminine beauty here, right? So I think that's why there was a separation, which is kind of the beginning of paganism. If you think about it, you had this great concept, this overarching thing. It's not just the earth that's observable, it's also the spirit world, which is also observable in our frame of reference as these people, right? So we tend out of convenience to form these different names just so that we can better contextualize it in that moment. What essence are we talking about here, even though they're still the same? And we can see this in Hinduism also. We can trace this in Hinduism as well through Jainism and such. But I want to throw something in there that I always found super fascinating in this discussion. And it really hit me when I was going on about the Egyptians and studying the Noon and their creation stories, because they also are terribly old as well. And I think it's just to say that our beginning in these creation stories, humankind, the universe, all that starts in nothingness and water. And where do we come from? Well, I began in water. I was in the amniotic. That's where I began. So subsequently, there
We lost them.
you see, or that, oh, I'm frozen. Dang it.
Not
Am I
anymore.
back?
You're
Am I
back.
back? Gosh,
Yeah.
what a crucial time. You see these depictions of the egg and the water as the birthplace reoccurringly. Tiamat was in the primordial waters of the Abzu, Namu in the primordial waters of the Abzu. Water. And so I really think that it was just a kind of like, here's our microcosm of how we came to be. And it's as simple as applying that to the macrocosm as it came to be, because this is an extension of us and we are nature. So there is the initial compassion that was shown to me in the microcosm, Inanna, Ishtar. And then there is the greater, macrocosmic birth of all of this, play, Maya, whatever, from Namu, from the great mother, right? The greater mother, which is very distant. That's very distant, right? It seems so beyond us, to the point where how often can we talk about it other than to celebrate the very foundation of reality itself? Which is pretty cool, I'd say. But
Yeah.
anyway, I hope I didn't miss anything there. Is there anything there that I jumped over too quickly?
Yeah.
What can we talk about a little bit more? See, the reason why I asked so much about Inanna is because I have had some connection with her over the past year and a half. So when I heard you talk about her, that it really sparked my interest, and I went to pull out my journals just to go back to what my experience was. And I know that she has many attributes, goddess of love and war and fertility. It just seems like there's so many facets of her.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, so think about this though. I mean, I have no idea what other people's relationships with their actual mother is like. But if we were to idealize the mother, then she is going to be fertile. She's going to know what it means to midwife because she's been through it. She can help guide you through that. She can be there for you in that way. She's going to be wrathful and go to war if anything threatens you.
there we go. That's
And
it.
so this archetype of all of these attributes of the mother is your mother. And so there's no, we tend to want to make it big, and it is big, but these attributes that are being attached, if you want to go down the rabbit hole, look into the ancient totems of the animals that she's hybrided with.
Yes.
And in which case, reflect those attributes as to how you can contextualize it in the idea of the ideal mother. And that's the essence, that's the spirit we're trying to work towards in these embodiments, in these statues, in these primordial or Neolithic, Paleolithic shrines.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because that's what we know. That's what we know. That's what we come from.
Right. And I know, and Marianne knows that prior to that, when we say primordial, it essentially means the whole of everything, the thing that created every other thing.
Yes,
right.
Yes.
And that there is a history before the history of our own country, which tends to be a problem in the United States, right? We think that history begins and ends in 1776. But I've seen what Marianne said, she's very complex. There's she's the goddess of war and the goddess of beauty and the goddess of love and the goddess of, I have found that to be true of all the goddesses I've come across that are thought of as primordial goddesses. Like in some schools of thought, Hecate is a primordial goddess who has always been with us. But also, as you say, right, like we can't know what those early peoples actually believed, right? There's no way for us to know that. So through our interpretations over all these years, maybe we've just made that all up, right? Maybe she wasn't really the goddess of war, love, death, sex, and everything in between, right? We don't know. We don't really know. So that's why a lot of the time, Marianne and I both think of her just as source, right? The source of all that is.
Yes, and I think there's more than enough inspiration to find in various traditions. I always found strong inspiration in the Tao, in that Zhuangzhou or Lao Tzu early parts, the thing that provides for all things but doesn't lord over them. That mentality right there, I felt, was quintessential, the fundamental yin behind everything, the canvas behind the stars, what makes the fertile ground of anything possible, that source, right? Which doesn't lord, it provides, which is the I guess the fundamental of the whole thing. But yes, historicity is a tricky, that's what they call it, when you can't know their context unless we shot ourselves through time and space to speak their language and to participate in their reality. Then we are playing a game of telephone. And we are not very good when it comes to, we project ourselves into the past. We are too biased about what we want to see oftentimes. And that's the detriment of history, is that we aren't looking at it objectively. We don't tend to do that. We always want to circumvent it to serve our own thesis or our own justification of what we want now. So yes, there's a lot to say there.
Right. I think that something else that I think Marianne and I have come to understand over time is that this nature or this primordialness of some of these goddesses is what allows us to understand the concept of this is a thing that in some ways I cannot know, because of my limited human brain capacity, right? But that whatever that is also a deity that's very personal to me, that I can have a personal relationship with. And that's where we see her as feminine comes in, because that primordial source is a non-physical being that doesn't have a gender. Like intellectually, we know that, but because we are who we are and we need what we need, and as you say, we want what we want right now, which is a mommy, right? To love me, care for me, nurture me, support me,
Yeah.
never judge
Tell me
me.
it's okay. Tell me it's okay.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So anyway, back to you, Marianne. Sorry, I keep like, but
No,
he
that's
inspires thought in me, and then it, comes out of my mouth.
The one thing I want to add to that before we move to a next subject is we can tend to lose what it means for something to be a spirit, in the sense that we've disregarded it culturally. That word is very charged in the way that it's been used, but there's a character template, right? There's an archetype, there's a profile that meets itself in reality in several ways. We want things to be beautiful, right? We want that. We want things to be beautiful, and we want compassion in this world. So we try to embody that, or we can think, who embodies that in my life? Or maybe somebody presents to you and they embody that spirit, that likeness, and then you'd say that is a embodiment in a corporeal form of the goddess. You are channeling the spirit, which of course, if I say it like that, that's very charged. But I just think about what it was in their context, for the best that I can, given historicity, is that, this is something that they wanted to emulate, that they wanted to channel, that they wanted to invite into their psyches, into their bodies as vessels to embody these attributes. Because where does beauty come from? Where does compassion come from? Where does nourishment come from? How can I be more like that? So I will follow the goddess, right? I will follow the source of that consciousness, beingness. Words get soupy there.
Right.
But I feel like I never have gotten the chance to really try to like hammer that in the sense of it's that simple. It's really that simple.
well, thank you.
Do you have any more questions, Marianne?
No, no, I don't. I mean, sure, I can always come up with some. Give me a minute. I could just talk about this forever.
I was going to say we could just spitball. So CG, I know that you and I have communicated a lot over the last few days. But what I didn't tell you is that Marianne and I think we would both, I think Marianne would label herself as a pagan. I would too, but I mean it in a different way than she does. When I say I'm a pagan, I just mean I'm not practicing one of the three major world's religions. I'm not practicing an Abrahamic religion. And we would both also identify ourselves as witches, because we've done what our understanding of witchcraft is, and we participate in that.
That's a really fun subject too.
Go ahead, Mary. Did you want to add to that?
Well, you and I have talked about this, Cal, how you're kind of not really falling under that pagan umbrella, and you and I have talked in depth about monotheism, polytheism, and, I'm still trying to find my way. Kelly and I share a lot of the same belief system. And what you just said about Inanna, that of being the primordial mother, it really solidified for me that they're just different facets of her, and that really hit me. That's so I don't know what that name is, but but it's I don't know what that is. Monotheism. When I think of monotheism, I think of the Abrahamic and, the three major religions, Polytheism kind of assigns roles to individual deities, so what do you have to say, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, and I might interject that I say I'm an essential monotheist, right? Which means that, yes, I think there are different facets and different deities, but they are all part of a singular source. We've used the phrase before, the diamond goddess, right? With all these different facets, and that's what these different deities are. Or the diamond god, because we are trying to get used to using the words goddess and god interchangeably.
So another, if y'all haven't looked into, or anybody for that matter hasn't really looked into Tara, T-A-R-A, from the Buddhist perspective, which doesn't get mentioned a lot because you don't think of Buddhism as god or goddess affiliate whatsoever, but the many different forms of Tara as something that they would meditate on is a illustration of the plurality of this goddess archetype. So that's a good way to go down. I tend to find the words monotheistic, polytheistic very unnecessarily restrictive. I think that we have always been seekers, and how we seek is due to whatever path we're on, right? But somewhere along the way, somebody says, I found the way, and here's how you go, which is that classic thing, well, this is the way I did it, so you have to do it this way, as if it applies to you, right? And how many instances in practical ways in our life is that not true? So these labels, I struggled, and I don't, any point in the course, you don't see me, I won't identify, because I feel like the labels only serve purpose. That is me informing someone else about words of convenience for other people's interpretation of you. If I say that I'm pagan, then all of a sudden I'm ousting certain people. Right. If I say that I'm interested in monotheism, then I'm ousting certain people. And I want to be open to everything. So labels, I just don't.
Yeah.
And then so like it's been to the confusion of people, because then I'll go speak at the Pagan Sanctuary, and they're like, oh, he's out there naked bumbling around, he's clearly a pagan. And then I'll go read the Bible for a while and talk about that. I just think the only term is a seeker. You're seeking. And I think that's what we've always been doing. And we just want to know what's going on, or try.
Absolutely. I agree totally. I think we're always looking for a name or a label. It's almost exclusive. We want to set ourselves apart from others with a title or a name, because these words like pagan and witch, they all come with an idea. So I like that that seeker.
And I like how I find a tremendous beauty in the diversity of reverence. And so I would never want these people to stop revering in their way, because that's so refreshing to me, right? Because if you go about it one way, it becomes monotonous and it becomes mundane. You have to keep the juices going, right? You have to keep it alive. You have to feel it. So, for some time that was me in an anipe, in a sweat lodge. For another time, it was me in a sangha. And at another time, it was me, doing that bunga, around the Pagan Sanctuary, right? And I love every one of those things. And so I'd really hope, and I think I've tried to push this a few times in the course, I really hope for the plurality of approach. I don't ever think there's ever been an answer. And so why have we become so fervent and insistent that it must be this one way, and that I'm on the in club and everybody else is on the out club, right? That sounds like ego to me. We always want to be the ones in the know. It's tricky. It's tricky. It's tricky.
Well, not that long ago, I was reading a book called Pagan Ethics, and in that book, in the introduction, the author says something, I'm paraphrasing, but the moment that man became divorced from the land, we've been like on this collision course that we're in now ever since, right? And it's kind of how we got to where we are. And I think it was also in that book that I read, or maybe that just gave me the idea to do some further research on that, but there are people who believe that where the biggest shift occurred was the introduction of agriculture, not agriculture like what the women in the tribes did, right? Which is also the origins of some of our witchcraft story, right? Because they intuitively knew how to work with the plants, and based on the cycles of the moon, they knew what to plant and where to plant it and what time to plant it. And I distracted myself from that thought. But when agriculture, as people started to settle and agriculture became a means of ownership, prior to that, there were no concepts of
divorce,
ownership, a class structure, and then a power structure, right? Which is, of course, where the patriarchy starts, because after the Greeks and the Romans, everybody that's in power is always male.
So, and I tried to break that one down in the rise of patriarchy thing too, because the act of saying this is what we all must believe inherently is a like phallus move, or in other words, a dick move.
Well, in Carla's podcast about, in her episode about Lilith, she talks a lot of, because Carla talks a lot about the patriarchy, and especially patriarchy in ancient history. And she talks a lot about how, well, and you've said the same thing, right? That women, that these female goddesses were either married off, made a consort to someone,
turned violent,
right,
villainous,
right, and yes, became demonized, and that is certainly true in the story of Lilith. So she was saying that once the Bible arrived and had that line about man shouldn't spill his seed, that there was a particular culture, I can't remember off the top of my head, but where the men in the tribe were taught from a very young age that if they had wet dreams, if they had nocturnal emissions, right, that's the polite phrase, that it wasn't, that it was because Lilith came in the night to steal their seed.
A succubus, and that's why
giving them no responsibility for their actions whatsoever. They just can't help themselves. And they've learned to fear powerful, independent women. And some of the goddesses, and the introduction of whatever the male version of Mother Maiden Crone is, little by little, all those goddesses, and you see this in Greek and Roman statuary, right? Either they were downgraded to very young and virginal, right? Therefore couldn't be a threat because they didn't know about their own sexuality and they were naive and blah, blah, blah. Or the opposite end of that spectrum, we were old hags and crones. You know what I mean? And if a goddess was beautiful, that was solely for the pleasure of the male getting to look at her. Like it served no other purpose.
I think there's two interesting things here. To see the lead of what turned into the Virgin Mary. That's the like spitting out of the whole equation is what the Virgin Mary was, which is generally regarded as in popular Christianity, at least at this point, a side character, a complete side character, almost negligible,
Right.
And is a virgin somehow, and also gave birth somehow, and that this is like, like the idea of that immaculateness, whatever, is what spilled out of this whole kind of rotunda. But I think what also on the former subject that I want to touch on is, this reproach towards, Terence McKenna called it the archaic revival, the reapproach of pre-agricultural thinking. And I think paganism as a term is getting there, but it's all animism. And I think that's getting there. And so I've generally, if anything, been an advocate for returning to the direct experience of the goddess, nature, whatever, direct experience now. And paganism, while it did embody some of the things that are lost, it also did lose some of the things that we don't want to keep through the action of paganism. So it's a half step in that way, when actually we just need to get to the, we got to get to the sauce instead, teaser out on the sides, come on. And this isn't a call to anarchy or anything like that, but I think that's what we're sniffing on the trail of. But there's a lot to say about the delineation of the sacredness of the mother as it spilled out in time. And I think it's not apart from the conversation of how we gain the idea of gross materialism and divorcement from the beauty of nature and respect for where we are and what it provides. I think those two things go hand in hand. Divorcing ourselves from the immediacy of sacredness put us down the road of defiling sacredness, defiling the earth, i.e. defiling the mother. And then here we are, to finally have maybe hopefully a sober moment of reproach and to relook at the tale that history has woven, or that we've woven for ourselves, more like.
See, I'm very cynical. I think there's no hope. I think we're beyond a point of no return. She's just going to wipe the board with us soon, and start over and create, humans version 8,764 or whatever.
We have, strangely, and just to play the dice, I don't stand anywhere real hard on this subject, but we have been through several extinction events as a people.
Yes.
It's not to say that our world is retained. Our world has been utterly wrecked several times. And we got spat out the other end. And the natives have prophecies for this. They have chock full prophecies for what will be left after. If we want to play the old apocalyptic mind, Revelation style.
Right.
But that's a whole nother wormhole.
Right. Well, and some of these things we're going to be talking about on future episodes. Carla told me that she's going to do because she was asked for suggestions of goddesses that we want to hear about, her stories or gods, monsters or whatever. And I asked her if she'd considered doing one on the history of the Virgin Mary and how she started, and then be up until what she is thought of as now, And I found this remarkable list. I bookmarked it. I'll have to send it to you guys. It's a list of all the places in the Bible that refer to a mother god. Because surprisingly, it's all over the place.
Asherah is the one that comes to my mind. Yeah, Asherah from the Canaanites was, I think, got 3 mentions, but it was damning mentions because they wanted to be rid of the sacred groves of Asherah.
So Marianne was asking me in her villainous, in the goddess in a villainous form, isn't she just another version of the punishing Christian of Catholicism? And I would say, yes, that's the point. They, the Greco-Roman world demonized whatever goddesses there are or were, or that they recognized that they couldn't, fuck or otherwise conquer. They were demonized. So of course they would say that she was punishing and all of that. But any belief in that is a very big Christian trope, right? It's a punishing God. We don't think our goddess is punishing at all, or even judging us. That when we go astray, she might bring lessons into our experience that will help us course correct, but that's not the same thing as saying she's punishing us.
Instructive.
Those are two very, very different concepts. So now we're kind of gearing into a little bit of, let's talk about emotions and spirituality in our personal lives, because that's very much what our show is about. And when I did try and stalk you online, I saw that you're also a poet, as am I. And I hear that come through in your lectures from time to time. And I heard it tonight. There was a phrase you used, when you said that the canvas behind the stars. And I was like, that's how I see that. I see you, poet. So tell us about the goddess in your life.
I would say, one of the great words that I could put to that energy is gratitude, of course, and trust. And trust in the sense of no matter how it goes, it's okay. And I think this world is very obviously lacking that feeling. It's okay. And I think that's as poignant as I can get it without divulging into forms and, more of the religiosity of the whole thing. But I would say that also the goddess in this sense of gratitude, beauty, trust, being okayness is always observable. And when I've had the grateful occasion of getting together with people to celebrate this, it's always powerful. And I have not seen the same from more opposite get-togethers.
Right.
So that's how I'd approach that question.
All right, Mayor.
I
think I'm good.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, this has been a lot. It is.
It has. And
I pages of notes that make no sense.
That's great.
Well, and hopefully we'll be able to do it again in the future. I would love to have you and Carla on, and we could talk about, we've been talking about doing an episode specifically about goddesses and witchcraft. And I think the four of us. You guys bring the academics and the research and the citations, and we'll bring you our emotional experience.
That's all I have.
Well,
I
love.
mean, you know, we do some of our own research too. You know, I mean, we look stuff up. I think
it's not something that I've got to dive headfirst into in the course, and I've been anticipating it for a long time. And you know,
Nice.
what is magic? What is the craft? You know, that's
gotta be. I think that's gonna be like, maybe that's our whole second season.
Yeah, right. Because that's a lot.
Right.
A lot.
So CG, I want to say thank you. I reached out to you out of nowhere, and I remember I texted Marianne immediately. I said I reached out to him. I asked him if he'd be interested in doing the podcast, and his immediate response was 100% yes.
Yeah, from my end, you know, just on a personal level, right? Like, I don't know how far you guys dug, but I just got paid to do this for a while. And then I did it out of passion because I saw people just show up. And then ever since, when I have people who reach out to me personally, I am so grateful to be in talk, in energy, in cahoots with people who are looking and who seek, and that are like-minded minds. Because my experience generally from years and years before was that I was always so estranged. I was always so weird, you know, so other in my thoughts and disposition. And so, you know, doing this course and then being asked, you know, people popping out of the blue, it's only brought great things. And so then I'm like, yes, I accept you from the ether. Yes, I accept you.
Right, because she brought us into each other's experience. So on the show, we like to ask all of our guests two questions at the end. What is your current favorite television show or movie? Yep, you can only pick one.
Only one.
That's horrible. Shoot.
I don't know.
I'm gonna say, just because it's very recent and it's been near and dear to my heart and mind, Persona. It's an Ingmar Bergman film from, I think, the early 70s and 60s.
Mm-hmm.
If anybody hasn't seen that, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to plug not only that film, but also Ingmar Bergman's filmography.
Right. All right. We'll have to get into that. I know I haven't seen it, and Marianne doesn't watch nearly as much television as I do, so she probably hasn't seen it.
It's a head trip. It's a head trip. That's my full line.
All right. And then the last question is, if you had to pick one song that is the theme song of the soundtrack of your life, what would it be?
Oh, that's also terrible.
Yeah.
I'm going to use this as an opportunity to plug a song that I love,
Okay.
and to kind of shift the question. It's in the manner of speaking by Noel Vague. If you listen to that song, you might think that my life is very sad accordingly, but I just have a lot of love for that song. It strikes up powerful memories in me each time it comes back into my life. So that's something I'd love to share.
So yeah, I think, Mara, what do you think?
I think this was
That's
great.
a wrap.
Thank you so much. Yeah,
It's been a tremendous pleasure to meet
fun.
both of you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye, y'all.
Okay, bye-bye.